As far as the east is from the west, so far have I separated your sins from you. That's what God says. I have loved you with an everlasting love. That's what God says. So we cling to what we know to be true. And if you don't actually know, maybe you don't really know what you know to be true about God. The scriptures are so full of who God is, and there are people here in this church who would love to just help you understand more about who God is and what God is promising and what God is offering. But this is what I do know, that if I am not clinging to what I know to be true, the thief will break in. The thief will kill. The thief will steal. The thief will destroy my hope, my peace, my joy. And I won't be singing, I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. So we cling to what we know to be true. And the second thing is call out your friends. Scott Peck wrote a number of books. He was a psychiatrist, and he wrote a number of books. One of them was called Further Along the Road Less Traveled. And in that book, he talks about being an alcoholic and how he would go to 12-step groups on a regular basis. And after the 12-step meetings, he would meet with his friends from the meeting, and they would talk. They would talk about all these bright, brilliant, deep questions, because they were all bright, brilliant, deep people. And then they would always come down to this one question. Why do you think God created the capacity for addiction? So they would ponder this and ask questions, and they would always come down to this one answer. God knows that healing happens best in community. God knows that if we want to get well, if we want to live abundantly, we need to do it with one another. My daughter is a former model, and she came to us about 3.5 years ago and said she had an eating disorder. And if you know much about eating disorders, they're just a really nasty, wicked thing. When she began to get well, her therapist, the first thing her therapist said was, you have to go to a 12-step meeting. You have to go to Overeaters Anonymous. And Ruthie went day after day after day to this meeting. But the very first meeting she went in fear and aloneness. She was so alone in her addiction. She sat down at the table, and I don't know if you've ever been to a 12-step meeting, but you open by saying your first name and what your addiction is. So she went in and she said, I'm Ruthie, and I have an eating disorder. And the person next to her said, I'm Ellen, and I have an eating disorder. And Ruthie looked at her like, oh. And the next person said, I'm Betty, and I have an eating disorder, and I'm Jim, and I have an eating disorder, and I'm John, and I have an eating disorder, and I'm Dan, and I have an eating disorder, and all the way around the room, every single person said, I have an eating disorder. And Ruthie realized for the first time in all of her years of struggling with this disorder that she was not alone. And she said in tears, I have felt so alone with this addiction. And after the meeting, all those people in the room crowded around her with their cell phones. And they said, when you get in trouble, when you feel alone, when you feel tempted to sin with your addiction, you call us. First you call me, and she put her phone number in. And then you call her, number 2. And when you can't get one, you call the next person. And you keep calling until you get to somebody who can stand with you, even on the phone, with your problem and your pain. Because why? Healing happens best in community. That's why the church is such a gift. That's why you are such a gift to one another. What does Jesus say? I came that you might have life and have it abundantly. When we cling to what we know to be true about God, when we call out our friends, we begin to live in the reality that Jesus promised. Okay, what I'd